You're 19 years old when your father teaches you the last lesson he will ever get to teach you as a free man giving free advice, though neither of you knows that yet. It is early spring, 1941 in Sisak, the town where the Kupa River meets the Sava, and you are standing over his forge doing something you have done 1,000 times, holding a horseshoe steady while he drives the nails. Sparks catch the last light through the open doors. Your father, Stepan, has been shoeing horses and mending plow blades since before you were born. He wore an Austro-Hungarian uniform in the last war for an empire that no longer exists on any map, and he almost never talks about those years except to say that every flag looks convincing right up until you're the one standing under it when it falls. Your mother, Manda, runs the house like an accountant runs a ledger, nothing wasted, nothing forgiven twice, and God help you if you track mud past the doorstep. Your younger sister, Zora, 16, borrows books she is technically too young to be allowed, and talks constantly about becoming a village school teacher, as though the matter is already settled. Down the road, Josip Baric, your best friend since the two of you were caught stealing plums from the same tree at age 8. He works his uncle's mill and can talk for a full hour about a girl he has not yet worked up the courage to speak to. That girl is Katerina Novak. Kata lives 2 houses from yours, and you have already worked up the courage to speak to her, mostly because she keeps finding reasons to walk past the forge at exactly the hour you are usually out front. Your life right now is small and specific in the way that only makes sense to the people actually living it. You are learning your father's trade. You expect one day to inherit it. Then Stepan hands you a single horseshoe nail, driven slightly crooked on purpose, still warm from the fire. Every good smith drives one nail wrong, he says, not looking up from the anvil. So the shoe can be pulled off clean later without ruining it. Means the horse can always be corrected before it's ruined for good. He closes your fingers around it and goes back to work. You put it in your coat pocket without understanding that he is not really talking about horses. On April 6, 1941, German bombers hit Belgrade without a declaration of war, and the invasion of Yugoslavia begins from every direction at once. German divisions crossing from Austria and Bulgaria, Italian forces pushing in from the west, Hungarian troops from the north. The Royal Yugoslav Army, outdated and pulled in 6 directions by 6 borders, collapses in days rather than weeks. You hear it happen the way most of Sisak hears it, through a radio that goes from confident to confused to silent over the course of a single week. On April 10th in Zagreb, the Ustaše movement, a small, violent nationalist faction that spent most of the 1930s in exile in Italy, proclaims the independent state of Croatia, the NDH, backed openly by German and Italian arms. 7 days later, on April 17th, the Yugoslav army surrenders unconditionally. Sisak wakes up inside a different country without anyone in it having voted for the change. New posters appear overnight. New flags replace old ones on the same poles. Radio announcers who sounded like your neighbors last week now read from someone else's script in someone else's voice. Your father closes the forge for 3 full days and does not explain why. When he finally reopens it, all he says is, "Watch who starts wearing the new uniform first. Those are the ones who already knew which way to jump. You are not yet old enough to be called up." That stops being true faster than anyone in your house is ready for. The summons arrives at your door in June, a single sheet of paper ordering you to report to the Croatian Home Guard, the Domobranstvo, the regular conscript army of the new state. It is built mostly from the same peasants, tradesmen's sons, and clerks who would have worn a different uniform 18 months earlier under a different flag, and it is, on paper, a separate institution from the Ustaše militia, a smaller, harder, ideologically committed force loyal directly to the regime. You will spend the next several years learning exactly how thin that line actually is. Your mother reads the paper twice before she believes the date on it. Josip receives an identical letter 2 days later, and for one evening, that feels almost like luck. Whatever is coming, at least the two of you will not walk into it as strangers. You report to a garrison outside Sisak in July. Training is short, improvised, and run by officers who seem to be assembling an army out of a country that is only 3 months old. You learn to march in step, grip a rifle in the dark, dig a firing position, and follow an order faster than you learn to ask a single question about it. Your section sergeant is Sergeant Rukavina, 34, a farmer's son from Banja with the patience of a man who has already decided that shouting wastes energy he is going to need later. He does not talk about politics. He talks about keeping your boots dry, your rifle clean, and your mouth shut around officers who ask leading questions. When one nervous recruit asks him straight out what he thinks of the new state, Rukavina looks at him for a long moment and says only, "I think a lot of men are about to find out exactly what obedience costs, and the bill has a habit of arriving late." Nobody laughs. You think of the crooked nail in your coat pocket and do not yet know how many times over the coming years you will reach into that pocket without meaning to. By August, word starts moving quietly through the garrison about a camp complex being built south south of Zagreb, near a river town called Jasenovac. Officially, it is a labor and detention facility for enemies of the state. The men who return from escort duty near it stop making eye contact when anyone asks what they saw there. Across the NDH, the Ustaše regime has already launched a campaign of legal persecution and mass killing directed at Serbs, Jews, and Roma, framed publicly as a security measure against internal enemies of the new state. Your unit is Home Guard, not Ustaše. You man checkpoints, guardrail junctions, and escort supply convoys, not the camp itself. And for a while, not the camp itself feels like enough ground to stand on. It stops feeling that way on an ordinary Tuesday in September when you are posted at the Sisak station and a freight train stops longer than freight trains usually stop. You are ordered to keep the platform clear of civilians. Through the slats of the cars, you hear voices, but you are told, and you choose to believe, that it is not your business to ask whose. Among them, unmistakably, is the voice of Mr. Weiss, who used to sell your mother thread from a shop 2 streets from the forge and always slipped an extra spool in for Zora. You do not see his face. You tell yourself that matters. That night, lying awake in the barracks, you understand for the first time that silence can be a kind of labor and that you have just finished a full day's shift of it. You do not tell Rukavina what you heard. You are fairly certain he already knows because the next morning he assigns you to guard duty at the far end of the yard, away from the platform without being asked, and neither of you ever mentions why. Josip disappears in late June, not long after word spreads through Sisak that an armed detachment has formed in the Brezovica forest just outside town. One of the very first organized resistance units to take up arms against occupation anywhere in Europe, though nobody involved yet knows that history will remember it that way. His uncle tells your families he has gone to visit a cousin in Karlovac. Kata tells you the truth a week later, quietly, at the well behind her house, because she trusts you and because she is already carrying messages for people whose names she will not say out loud even to you. Josip has gone to the woods. You feel something close to betrayal first, then something closer to envy, and then, worse than either one, the start of a question you cannot yet answer. Whether the difference between the two of you is conviction or simply the order the letters happen to arrive in. The insurgency grows through 1942 and into 1943. Partisan units operating out of the Kordun and Banija Hills ambush convoys, cut rail lines, and disappear back into villages that may or may not have sheltered them the night before. Command's answer is reprisal for every soldier killed, a multiple of hostages executed, or a village burned, a policy borrowed wholesale from German practice and applied with local enthusiasm by officers like Bojnik Zvonko Peric, who takes command of your sector in the spring of 1943. Peric is precise, unhurried, and completely convinced that mercy is simply a form of poor discipline. In April, an ambush on the Sisak-Petrinya road kills 2 of your men. Peric orders a nearby village searched and 10 men held as hostages pending cooperation. You are assigned to the search detail, moving house to house with your rifle raised at doorways you have walked past peacefully 100 times. In the back room of a farmhouse, you pull back a blanket hanging over a low bed and find a boy no older than Zora curled underneath it, his grandmother's hand pressed flat over his mouth, both of them frozen and staring up at you. You are the only soldier who sees them. For perhaps 3 full seconds, you say nothing, and the entire choice sits inside that silence. 3 seconds that will outweigh, in your own memory, almost everything else you do in this uniform. Then you let the blanket fall back into place, turn, and tell the man behind you the room is empty. It is the smallest possible act, and it changes nothing about the 10 men already standing in the square. 3 of them are shot before the afternoon ends, on Peric's direct order, while the rest are marched off toward a camp whose name he does not bother repeating twice. You carry your father's crooked nail in your pocket that night, turning it over and over with your thumb, and understand finally and completely exactly what he meant by it. On September 8, 1943, Italy surrenders to the Allies, and the balance of the war across Yugoslavia shifts almost overnight. Partisan units seize enormous stockpiles of abandoned Italian weapons and expand rapidly into territory the Italian army had occupied for 2 years. 2 months later, at the Tehran Conference, Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union formally backed Tito's partisans, not the rival royalist Chetniks, as the recognized Allied resistance movement inside occupied Yugoslavia. Word of this travels through the Home Guard the way weather travels through a valley, felt before it's officially announced. Desertion, once rare and quietly punished, starts becoming something entire units do together. Whole garrisons walking into the hills on the same night, officers sometimes included. Rukavina hears the same reports you do and says nothing about them for days. Then one evening, while cleaning his rifle by lamplight without looking up, he says, a smart man starts asking which side is actually going to still exist in 2 years. You understand he is not talking about the rifle in his hands. You cross in October 1943, at night, through a gap in the perimeter wire you have quietly watched go unpatched for 3 weeks. You take your rifle, your father's nail, and nothing else. No letter, no photograph, nothing that would mark you as a man who had time to plan. Reaching the tree line does not feel like arrival. A partisan patrol takes you at gunpoint within the hour and marches you to a forest camp where you spend 2 days under guard while a political commissar named Danica Kovacevic decides whether you are a genuine defector or an informer sent to map their positions. She asks about the boy under the bed, about Peric, about the freight train at Sisak station, and the voice you heard and never told anyone about. You answer everything without softening a word of it, because softening it now would just be the same silence again, wearing a different uniform. On the third day, a fighter walks into the tent, takes one look at your face, and starts laughing before he can stop himself. It is Josip, thinner, harder, older around the eyes than the boy who once talked for an hour about a girl he was too nervous to approach. He vouches for you on the spot. Danica is considerably less moved by friendship than by the accuracy of your answers, but she signs the paper anyway. You are officially now a partisan. The fighting through 1944 carries none of the confusion of your first year in uniform, and all of a different, sharper kind. You learn to move through the Kordun forests at night by feel more than sight, to read Peric's old tactics from the opposite side of them, to trust the man on your left because the alternative, trusting no one, gets people killed faster than any ambush does. In March, your unit hits a Home Guard convoy resupplying a garrison 2 valleys from where you once stood due to yourself. You recognize the road before, you recognize any of the men on it, and for a strange, cold half-second you wonder if any of them once served beside you. None do. The firefight lasts 11 minutes by Josip's count, ends with the convoy abandoned and burning, and neither of you talks about it again that night, which is its own kind of conversation. In October, far to the east, Belgrade falls to a combined Red Army and Partisan offensive, and the war's center of gravity tips decisively for the first time since 1941. Through that winter, your unit fights a slow, grinding campaign pushing Home Guard and Ustasha forces back towards Zagreb, village by village, rail junction by rail junction, some of it the exact ground you once stood guard over wearing the other uniform, which makes every step forward feel like an argument you are finally allowed to finish. You are wounded once in January 1945, a rifle round through the meat of your shoulder during an ambush outside Petrinja. Josip carries you nearly 2 kilometers to a field station, arguing the entire way, breathless, that you are far too stubborn to be allowed to die on him now, after everything the two of you have already survived together. You believe him mostly because, at that particular moment, you need to. By early May 1945, your column is moving on Sisak itself, one arm of the final offensive, closing on Zagreb from every direction at once. Walking down a road you once patrolled in a different coat for a different flag, you do not know whether your family is still alive or whether the forge is still standing, or whether 4 years is enough time for a town to simply erase the version of you that used to live in it. The fighting for the town itself is short and uneven, mostly exhausted Ustasha rearguards and Home Guard units too trapped or too tired to run any further, and it ends the same week Germany's unconditional surrender is being signed in the West. You reach your own street before you let yourself believe it. The forge is standing, its roof half-caved from a stray shell earlier that spring, smoke-stained but standing. Your father is outside it, older, thinner, and unmistakably alive. He looks at your uniform for a long moment before he looks at your face, the way a man reads a document before he reads the signature. Then he says only, "I wondered which nail you'd end up being. Your mother is alive." Zora, 17 now, has been teaching the neighborhood's youngest children out of a borrowed kitchen since the school itself was requisitioned 2 years ago. Kata is alive too, thinner from 3 years of stretched hospital rations, dark circles under her eyes from too many night shifts tending, wounded from both sides of a war she never asked to be conscripted into. She does not wait for you to find the right words before she crosses the yard and puts her arms around you as though she has been rehearsing exactly this moment the entire time you were gone. The relief does not stay uncomplicated for long. Zagreb falls to partisan forces on May 8th, the same day Germany formally surrenders in Europe, and within the week, the remnants of the NDH's army and government attempt to reach British lines near Bleiburg in Austria. Home Guard units, Ustasha formations, and tens of thousands of civilians who fled alongside them, hoping to surrender to the Western Allies rather than fall into partisan hands. The British refuse them, columns are turned back across the border into Yugoslav custody, and what follows over the coming weeks becomes known bitterly as the Way of the Cross, forced marches and mass killings that historians and survivors on every side of the argument will still be disputing in numbers and in meaning for the rest of the century. Weeks later, a released prisoner passes through Sisak carrying a list of names, and Rukavina's is on it. He never crossed with you. He told someone before the end that he had already run once in his life, and did not believe a man got to do that twice with a clean conscience. You do not know if that is true or simply the sentence he needed to survive on for as long as he could. You know only that the same war that let you correct your own crooked nail in time never offered him the same chance, and you carry that unevenly without ever fully setting it down for the rest of your life. The Yugoslavia that rebuilds after 1945 is not the country you were born into, and it is not a country without its own hard edges, but it is, for the first time in 4 years, one you are not required to guard a silence for. You marry Kata that autumn. You reopen the forge alongside your father until his hands finally give out for good, and then you run it yourself, and years later your own son runs it beside you the same way you once stood beside Stepan, holding a horseshoe steady while someone else drives the nails. Josip becomes a factory foreman in Sisak and visits every year on the same date in October, though neither of you ever says out loud which date it is or why it matters. Zora gets her wish in full, a real classroom with a real roof, and 30 children who call her Uchiteljka without a trace of irony. You never tell your own children about the freight train at the station, or the boy under the blanket, or Perich. In the easy metal-shaped way some old soldiers eventually learn to tell war stories at kitchen tables. When your grandson is finally old enough to hold a hammer without dropping it on his foot, you take him to the same anvil and drive a horseshoe nail slightly crooked, on purpose, exactly the way your father once showed you. Every good smith drives one nail wrong, you tell him, closing his fingers around it while it is still warm, so the shoe can always be pulled off clean, before it ruins the horse for good. He does not understand yet what you actually mean by that. You did not either, once standing in this same spot at 19 years old, believing the only thing ahead of you was your father's trade and a girl who kept walking past the forge for no reason she would admit to. You let your grandson keep the nail anyway, and you watch him slide it into his pocket, not yet knowing that it was never really about horses at all.